Hello, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Brey, and today I'll be showcasing to you my latest mechanic implementation in this tile-based puzzle game known as Tournamental. Being tasked with the goal of creating a new mechanic in this game, I implemented a character splitting feature that when the player steps onto a specific tile, they split into two playable characters, which I will now demonstrate. And if you are playing as the smaller two playable characters and you enter the same tile as your other playable character, you grow into your big guy once again. So to start off, we have these half walls, which as the big guy, the player is unable to enter or pass through. But once the player steps onto the splitting tile, as the small guy, you are able to pass through. And uh, as you may have noticed, you are able to swap between these two players by pressing the spacebar. And as a small player, you are unable to enter the splitting tile until you become big again, because we don't want to have multiple splits. We only want to split into once, be able to split once. So now I can go ahead and solve this puzzle. And I win. Alright, so now to go through some of the components that make up this mechanic, we will start with our smaller character, which is just a child of the original entity player. And then we also have our half wall tiles, and of course our tile splitter, and most importantly, we have our uh, player controller, which is the main control for this character splitting. So I'll start with the tile splitter, which is where all of this information starts. So when the player enters the tile, we talk to our player controller and tell it that the character is split, as well as pass through some information such as the current tile that it is, and as well as two spawning tiles of where we want the player to spawn. They are instance editable, and you have to set them in order for the two small people to spawn. So now I'll go into our player character, and in the event graph at our event character split, we start by setting some variables, and then we go ahead and destroy the large player character so that he doesn't exist anymore and you can't see him. And then we go and spawn our first character. And to do that, we start by setting the current tile as unenterable so that the small guys cannot go into the tile again and split again. Otherwise, it would be problematic and such. And then we get a reference to our camera. And then this is when we set our entity type at the spawn tile that we marked out in the editor. And we set it to our a small entity player right here. And then, of course, we update that tile and we save that reference to it. We then possess it, and then we set this variable is PC01 possessed to true. This will come in handy later. And then we have our indicators, which live above the small entity to indicate which character is currently being controlled, and this is being set to on. And then we will go and spawn our second character. This is very similar to our spawning the first character, right? You get your spawn tile, set new entity type, update the entity, save the reference, and then toggle the activation indicator, this time off because this second player character is obviously not being controlled. Alright, after that, we set our camera actor. Otherwise, it causes some problems and you go into first person. And then we tell the whole world through an event dispatcher that the character is currently split. This is very important to later functionality. And then we then send each of the characters uh, references of themselves. So we'll go into the entity character in a second, and I'll show the importance of that. But here we send the first player character a reference to the second player character, and vice versa for the second player character. All right, and now I'll go into our small guy. Um, so we have our toggle activation indicator, which I showed in over here, right here. And this is just simply setting a activation code in the viewport to on or off visibly. Um, okay, and then I will go ahead. Oh, but okay, so in the base entity player, I added an action input of right down here. The action input, it's a space bar, and um, this sets is character split, which is another important uh, right up here. We uh, toggle it. We grab it from the event dispatcher to make sure that the player is split when we call this spacebar. Otherwise, it would cause some problems because you could be able to call it as the big guy, which we don't want. So then we check is player split. If they are, then we go ahead and talk again to the player controller and send that the player wants to swap characters. So back to our player controller. On event swap characters, this is where this variable in the first spawner is important because it's saying that the first character is possessed, and this is how we check which entity is currently possessed. If the first character, spawned character, is possessed, then we possess our second character, set this to false, toggle the activation indicator to on for our second player character and off to our first, reset the camera actor, and play a sound. And then, of course, if the player is to press spacebar again, and since they're playing as a second character, possession, and this is again called PC is this boolean is false. We possess the first character, set this to true, turn off the activation indicator for our second player character, on for the first, set the camera actor, and then play a sound again. Alright, and now we will go to our smaller character because this is where our implementation of whether or not if we where we combine the two characters to um, make them the big guy again. So every time the character moves, we check if the other player character, which we've gotten through this event, which was again called in our uh, player controller right here. We get that reference, and then we also set a reference of the destination tile. We check to make sure whether or not this other character even exists. If it does, then we check does the destination tile equal the other character's current tile, which means essentially if you're about to move to the same tile that the other player character is on. And of course, if this is true, we set the destination tile to can enter, um, and then we talk to the player controller again and we tell it to combine the character and give it some reference. We give it a reference to the current tile as well as the destination tile. So now back to our uh, player controller. On the event that the character is combined, we start by playing a sound, and then we go ahead and destroy our two player characters so that they no longer exist in this world. And then we set the current tile or the destination tile entity to the big player. And then we update the tile, possess it, and then we tell the whole world through the event dispatcher that the player is no longer split. And then, of course, we reset the camera actor so we don't have that weird bug of going to first person. Um, so I'll go back to our splitter tile because there's still a bit of information here. So we determine whether or not the tile uh, uh, can be enterable through the event dispatcher. If the player is split, then we set can enter to the whatever, or we set the can enter of the splitter tile to whatever the boolean of is player split not. So then, of course, we can enter as the big guy, but not enter as the small guy, which is important. And then we can also toggle the color change, which you saw with the glowing tile, um, to indicate that this tile is, important and stuff. And then we have this custom event down here to go on a timer and a timeline to change the color of the tile. And then this is toggled on and off, once again, based on this is the whether or not the player is split. I'll also go into our tile half wall. This is very simple. Once again, we grab our is player split event dispatcher and we check whether or not the player is split. If they aren't, then of course you're the big guy, so you aren't able to enter. And we set its can enter to false. And if you are split, you're the smaller characters, you're able to enter, which is, the entire point of this half wall. All right, and I believe that is all. So, thank you for joining me today, and this has been the walkthrough of my Navigator and mechanic implementation of Tile Splitter. Thank you.